It was the Holocaust before the Holocaust. The Pinsker Orphans by David Sandler describes the horrid atrocities Jews faced in the Pale Settlement. Pink snow was falling all around the Jewish settlements. It was only on closer inspection that they realized the pink snow was, in fact, red feathers from pillows that Jews were underneath when slaughtered. Beginning in the year 1881, pogroms ravaged the Jewish people. Pogroms are collective violence and attacks on specific groups of people, especially Jews. During some pogroms, over 10,000 Jews were killed. Whole entire Jewish communities were wiped out. Jews were lined up and forced to dig their own graves, which they were then shot into. After hearing about these horrors from smuggled letters sent by Jews in the Pale Settlement, Isaac Ochberg, a wealthy Jewish philanthropist and businessman, broke barriers by traveling back to his war-torn homeland to save approximately 200 orphans. Known to those he saved as Daddy Ochberg, Isaac put his life at a monstrous risk for children suffering from seeing the slaughter of their parents and the dehumanizing of their religion. Daddy Ochberg took a stand against the barbaric hatred towards his people and persevered despite the extreme dangers of disease and anti-Semitic mobs. Isaac Ochberg was born in 1878 in the town of Uman, Ukraine, where he was surrounded by anti-Semitism. In 1882, Russian Tsar Alexander III passed the May Laws, a series of anti-Semitic laws that ostracized Jews from society and limited the amount of Jews who could attend schools. The May Laws were passed after the assassination of the Russian Tsar Alexander II. One of the plotters of Alexander II's assassination was a Jewish woman named Gessia Gelfman. Anti-Semites used Gelfman's involvement in the assassination of Alexander II as a justification to massacre Jews in pogroms. Throughout the pogroms, the amount of Jewish orphans numbered between 150,000 to 400,000. A few years after moving to South Africa, Isaac finally received citizenship, which allowed him to turn his attention to his next goal, rescuing his family from the nefarious actions towards Jews in the Pale. Lawrence Nitcher told us about a specific story in which a Russian man said to a Jewish mother,
"I'm going to slit your child's throat." They said to her, they gave him a poker, a red-hot poker, and they said to him, "Poke your sister's eyes out." And when he refused to do that, they said, "That hand that refuses to obey us, I'm going to cut that hand off at the wrist."
Ochberg was involved in almost every single Jewish organization within South Africa and never refused to support a worthy charity. He always had a deep interest in children and later became the president of the Cape Jewish Orphanage. In 1920, stories about the torment of Russian Jews reached South Africa. Therefore, Isaac approached the Union government to obtain permission to extricate Jewish orphans to South Africa. Under the influence and power of South African Prime Minister Jan Smuts, the Union government agreed to give Isaac permission if he and the South African Jewish community agreed to make themselves fully responsible for the funding. With this in mind, Isaac Ochberg reached out to Jewish communities around South Africa to find people who would generously patronize his cause. Isaac began seeking families willing to adopt the orphans he would rescue. Isaac's search for support led him to become acquainted with Jan Smuts. Under select terms, Smuts offered to match the money that Isaac raised pound for pound. Smuts' rules laid out barriers for Isaac to follow, all of which he would break later on.
The South African government set some criteria about the orphans that Isaac Ochberg could bring in.
Once Isaac had enough government support and funds, he felt he could embark on his journey to the Pale Settlement. On March 18, 1921, Isaac traveled to London, where the orphans would eventually stop along their trip to South Africa. While in London, Isaac arranged shelter for when the orphans would stay there. He also evaluated how he would enter Russia and not be targeted for his religious beliefs. One way he accomplished this was with help from Dr. Fridtjof Nansen, creator of the Nansen passport. Dr. Nansen personally came in contact with Isaac Ochberg and granted him a specially made Nansen passport, which allowed him to freely travel around Russia with no trouble from any authorities. By issuing this passport, Dr. Nansen gave Isaac the ability to break the Russian legal obstacles which would have prevented him from saving orphans. Isaac defied the Russian government by having this passport because it gave him power and influence within their country. This passport would mean a great deal to Isaac, as during his ventures in Russia, he would come across anti-Semitic military personnel who questioned him. Isaac's special Nansen passport would make him the first British Jew to be able to freely travel around Russia. When he arrived in Russia, Isaac became devastated with what he saw. The Russian Jews had been plundered and decimated, and those remaining were severely sick and traumatized.
The Cossacks came in on their horses with their bayonets and speared babies and tossed them in the air and just killed them straight outright and let these babies just fall on the ground.
Isaac would select a total of 200 orphans, but not all of them would reach South Africa or even London. Some of the orphans would run away after hearing tales of wild animals in South Africa. During the voyage, the orphans became very comfortable with Isaac and started to call him Daddy Ochberg. The orphans and Daddy Ochberg had formed a family.
And they really saw him a little bit as their dad, like their relative, their father. And so that's sort of an emotional, let's say, barrier he broke. And he was always very good to them. And the kids saw him as they used to call him Daddy Ochberg.
Betty Greenberg, an orphan Isaac saved, stated, "He was like a father to us. There was no difference from one child to another. He was just wonderful." On September 19th, 1921, they arrived in South Africa, where they were greeted by hundreds of people delighted to see them. 1 year later, in 1922, Isaac surmounted more hardships when he returned to the Pale of Settlement and attempted to bring additional orphans back with him again. This time, he could not obtain permission from the Russian government to bring any more Jews out of the country. Yet, this did not stop Isaac from doing everything in his power to aid them. He later set up soup kitchens and shelters for Jews in Russia. These shelters affected and saved thousands of other lives. Isaac Ochberg not only broke the barriers of societal anti-Semitism, but he wholeheartedly disregarded it. He had the courage and audacity to do what was right, regardless of the obstacles in front of him. In his will, he donated large amounts of money to Palestine and established small communities there called kibbutzim. To this date, Isaac is the single largest donor to the Jewish National Fund. He donated generously large sums of money, accumulating over £500,000, to various organizations helping Jews in need. Through his efforts, Daddy Ochberg was responsible for saving thousands of Russian Jews and creating opportunities for thousands of others across the world.
The term effect of him is that he really platformed or gave the opportunity for so much life. And so out of a very bad situation, he saved these lives so that they could have children and their children could have children. And so he established a huge legacy that carries our Judaism forward and that carries our families forward. And we will keep telling his story to our children because he's so important.
Isaac focused attention on the horrendous acts being perpetrated on them. He was unapologetic in his passion for rescuing as many children as he could in post-World War I Russia. So far, there are over 4,000 descendants of the orphans he rescued. Daddy Ochberg did not only save 200 lives, but he saved over 4,000 worlds.